Blood drips one small drop at a time onto the cold ceramic floor of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, each drop echoing like the shattered ticking of a broken clock. My vision blurs at the edges, yet I can still see clearly the face of my sister Sophie, pale and terrified, her hand gripping mine so tightly I fear the bones in my fingers might snap, but I do not pull away. I cannot, because if I let go, I will collapse. And if I collapse, I am not sure I will ever be able to stand again. Miss Emily, we need to take you for a CT scan immediately. The nurse's voice reaches me as though it is coming from another world, muffled and distant, like sound traveling through deep water. This is a severe head injury. I try to nod, but even the smallest movement sends a stabbing pain exploding through my skull, sharp as a blade driven straight into my brain, forcing a faint groan from my lips. The waiting room spins. Somewhere behind me, I hear Sophie's voice break as she makes a phone call, her words trembling as though she is on the verge of tears. Mom, Emily is badly hurt. I do not know exactly what happened. I asked her, but she will not say. Can you come to the hospital right away? Downtown Chicago, Northwestern. What happened? A question that should be simple, yet far too horrifying to answer. Only 6 hours earlier, I had been standing in the Magnolia Contemporary Gallery, wearing my favorite black dress, my grandmother's pearl necklace at my throat, a glass of white wine in my hand, speaking with art collectors and foundation directors. 6 hours earlier, I still believed Victor Hale was only a wealthy donor, arrogant perhaps, but harmless. I never imagined he would follow me into the service hallway when I stepped away to check the catering area. I never imagined he would corner me against a white brick wall, his breath thick with whiskey and power, his hand clamping over my mouth when I tried to scream. And I could not have imagined that when I struggled and shoved him hard enough to make him stumble, Victor would seize the bronze sculpture placed nearby, the very piece I had spent nearly 2 weeks choosing the perfect display position for, and bring it crashing down onto my head. The pain was not only physical. It was collapse, the sound of everything I had built shattering. I, Emily Carter, 27 years old, the youngest assistant curator in Magnolia's history, newly nominated to be the lead curator for the autumn exhibition. I had spent 4 years in graduate school, 2 years in unpaid internships, 3 years working past every deadline and beyond every limit to earn this chance. And now here I am, bleeding in a hospital bed, staying silent not because I cannot speak, but because I am afraid the truth will destroy everything I have earned. If you are still listening at this moment, thank you for staying with Emily's story. Every moment you spend listening is a part of the strength that helps us share honest, emotional, and deeply reflective stories like this with more people. Please click subscribe, like the video, and share it if this story has touched your heart. Where are you listening from? Comment the name of your city or where you live right below, so we can see how far this story has traveled across America and even beyond. Thank you, and stay with us, because there is so much more waiting ahead. 6 hours earlier, the Magnolia Contemporary Gallery had been awash in light and laughter, wine glasses touching softly in the air between lively conversations. It was the opening night of Still and Alive, an exhibition I had spent 3 months conceptualizing, selecting works, writing introductions, and arranging every small detail. Abstract paintings hung in perfect alignment against white walls, metal sculptures reflected warm light, and I, in a simple black dress, newly purchased heels, and a string of pearls around my neck, felt as though everything was finally falling into place. I spoke with the city museum director, exchanged business cards with a collector from New York, and offered a polite, measured smile when Victor Hale stepped into the crowd. He shook hands as though the evening belonged to him, as though his financial contribution to the exhibition granted him ownership of the space itself. When he approached me, I kept the same professional smile, the same polite tone as always. Victor was a major donor and could not be brushed aside. He complimented me on the arrangement of the works, on the way the lighting created depth for each sculpted form, and I nodded, thanked him, never imagining that tonight would be the turning point of my life. Around 9 o'clock, I quietly slipped away from the crowd to check the service area in the back hallway. Some of the desserts had run out. The catering staff was replacing trays. I was speaking to one of them when I heard the soft tap of men's shoes behind me. I turned. It was Victor. I was startled to see him there, in a space meant only for employees. I offered a polite smile and began to step away, but he blocked the path. The hallway was dimmer than the gallery, the music and voices now distant. He stepped closer than necessary. "I am truly impressed with how you organized tonight, Emily," he said, his voice low and drawn out like aged wine, yet it sent a shiver through me. "Thank you," I replied, steadying my voice. I tried to move past him, but he did not step aside. He reached out, touched my arm, then tightened his grip. I recoiled instinctively. The air thickened instantly. I told him to stop, that it was inappropriate, but Victor only curled his lips into a smile as though I were telling a joke. His breath carried the heavy burn of whiskey. For the first time, I felt real fear. When I tried to push him away, he turned rough, his hand clamped over my mouth, and his body pressed against mine. I struggled. I remember summoning all my strength to shove him backward. And in that, a moment, he lost his balance, stumbling toward a bronze sculpture resting on a pedestal. For a heartbeat, I thought he would retreat, would walk away, but he did not. He seized the sculpture, a heavy abstract bronze spiral I had carefully positioned at the end of the hallway as an artistic focal point, and without a word, he brought it crashing into my head. Everything after that was a flash of light, a sound like splintering glass, a searing pain tearing through my skull like a surge of electricity. I collapsed onto the cold tile, the taste of blood spilling into my mouth, my eyes open but unable to see clearly, only blurred light and the fading sound of hurried footsteps retreating. I do not know how much time passed before Sophie found me. She screamed for help, her panicked voice echoing like the wail of an ambulance siren tearing through my mind. And now I lie here in a hospital bed, my head wrapped in bandages, my pulse unsteady, my palms still haunted by the coldness of the stone floor from that hallway. 6 hours earlier, I held a future bright and whole in my hands. Now, I hold only a secret, a truth that, if spoken aloud, could destroy the career I spent years building. But if I stay silent, then perhaps the part of me that knows what is right will die with it. I wake to the cold white glare of the hospital ceiling, my head throbbing as though someone is striking each vertebra at the base of my skull with a hammer. The first sensation is dizziness, then a stabbing ache, then the rising panic of not remembering where I am during those first few seconds. Then everything returns like a film rewinding dim hallway lights, the clink of glasses, voices stretched into whispers, the smell of whiskey tangled with the metallic taste in the air, and then the heavy bronze sculpture. A shiver runs down my spine, even though my skin is slick with cold sweat. The door eases open, and Sophie steps inside, holding a steaming cup of coffee, dark circles under her eyes, her hair tied back in haste, her face drawn tight as though she has not slept at all. She sits beside me, placing her hand over mine with a touch that is gentle yet firm. "The doctor said you have a mild cranial injury, a fracture at the back of your skull. You are lucky you do not need surgery, but they need to monitor you closely for a few days. Emily, what happened?" I look at her, my throat dry, my heart pounding so hard it feels as though it might burst free from my chest. I know I must tell her. I know I should tell her. But the words that leave my mouth are the only ones I know will silence her, at least for now. I fell down the stairs. Sophie's brow tightens. Where? When? In the back of the gallery. I was looking at my phone, not paying attention, and tripped. I speak as though I have rehearsed it dozens of times in my head. She studies me for a long moment, her eyes heavy with doubt and hurt. "Are you sure?" I nod, avoiding her gaze, forcing my voice not to tremble. It was my fault. No one speaks for a long stretch of time. Sophie simply sits there, her eyes distant as though weighing whether she should call the police right now. But in the end, she only exhales, takes out her phone to text our mother, then rises and walks out. When the door closes behind her, I finally allow myself to gasp for air, tears soaking the pillow. I turn my head to the side and slowly reach for my phone resting on the small table beside the bed. The screen lights up. There are 6 unread messages. 2 from colleagues, 1 from the gallery director, 3 from an unsaved number. I open the most recent one. "I hope you are resting. Accidents can happen at any time. The important thing is knowing how to stay quiet so everything can settle. Do not let one foolish moment destroy everything you have built." My heart feels as though it is being crushed in someone's fist. The message is unsigned, but I do not have to guess. That sickly, sweet tone of threat could only belong to Victor Hale. I bite down hard on my lip, delete the message, then erase the entire call history from last night. Another message from the same number. I have spoken with the board. They are concerned about you. But do not worry, I reassured them for you. Rest, Emily. Everything will be fine. If you are wise. I set the phone down as though it has burst into flame. My whole body trembles. Not because I am frightened, not only because I am frightened, but because of disgust, because of helplessness, because of the feeling of being manipulated even while lying in a hospital bed with my head wrapped in bandages and an IV dripping into my arm. I force myself to breathe, slow and deliberate, but my pulse still races wildly. I look up at the ceiling, the fluorescent light flickering softly, emitting a faint hiss. Everything is suffocatingly quiet. I know Victor is counting every second of my silence, and I also know that if I speak, he will not hesitate to destroy me in the most calculated and merciless way. But what I am no longer certain of is how long I can endure this silence. That afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the thin curtains by the window, I drifted into a dazed sleep under the haze of pain medication, my head still aching with a dull, slow pounding like a drum beating inside my skull. I do not know how long I slept, only that when I opened my eyes, there was someone else in the room, Claire Moreau. Claire stood near the door, her cream-colored heels tapping softly against the tile, her gaze filled with worry as she looked at me. She stepped closer, saying nothing at first, simply pulling a chair beside the bed and sitting down, her hand resting over mine, as though she needed to confirm that I was still here, still breathing. Claire was one of the young artists I had invited to exhibit at Magnolia. We had only known each other a few weeks, yet there was a strange connection between us, as though we were both trying to carve out a place for ourselves in a world that was harsh and cold. "I heard this morning," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you all right?" I gave her a faint smile, turning my head slightly toward her. "I fell down the stairs. It is not too serious." Claire stared at me for a long time, her eyes searching, as though she could see through the fragile shell I had just built around myself. Then, without another word, she opened her handbag, took out her phone, and typed a message. Not even a minute later, she stood. "Someone wants to see you," she said, then left the room without explaining anything. I had not yet made sense of her words when 10 minutes later, a knock sounded. The door opened, and the man who stepped inside made the entire room tighten in a single breath. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark brown hair swept back, wearing a long black coat that reached his knees, and his eyes, dear God, those eyes sharp as steel, but behind them simmered a fury held in place by sheer force. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice low and precise like a command. I clenched the blanket in my fist, my mouth dry. "Who are you?" The man walked toward me, his gaze never leaving mine for even a heartbeat. "Logan Moreau. I am Claire's brother." The name sounded familiar, very familiar. Claire had mentioned once, vaguely, that her brother ran a well-known investment firm in Chicago, the kind of man who lived in the shadows but had influence in the rooms where real decisions were made. But what I saw now did not resemble an investor. Logan carried the presence of someone who had witnessed darkness and knew exactly how to confront it. "Claire called me this morning," he continued, his voice not loud but firm enough that every word struck the air. "She said you were in the hospital. Said you refused to speak to the police, that something serious happened, but you will not say a word." I shook my head, trying to steady myself. "I fell." Logan stared at me, unblinking. "Whatever makes my sister cry at 2 a.m. when she calls me is not a fall. You were attacked. I want to know who did it." My breath caught in my throat. In the past 12 hours, no one had dared to say those words aloud. Not the nurses, not the doctors, not even Sophie. But this man Logan did not look like someone who would stop because I denied it. "I do not know you," I said, forcing my voice to stay firm. "You do not need to get involved." Logan's brow tightened, his eyes turning hard. "Claire cares about you. I owe my sister. And I will not stand by while a woman is beaten hard enough to fracture her skull and then told she fell down the stairs." I turned away, unwilling to let him see my eyes filling with tears. He stepped closer, right beside the bed, leaning down, his voice dropping to a low blade edge. "He thinks you will not speak. He thinks you will stay silent because you are afraid of losing your career, afraid of losing your reputation. But he does not know one thing." I looked up, unable to pull away from that gaze. "What is that?" I whispered. Logan answered, his voice like stone rolling through a hollow chamber. "That I am here now." I do not know why I did not call a nurse or press the emergency button the moment Logan stepped closer to the bed. Do not know why I did not shout or tell him to leave. Perhaps it was because in his eyes, beneath the frozen layer of anger and determination, there was something that kept me from turning away. Not threat, but certainty, a certainty so absolute it bordered on merciless, the certainty that he would not stop until he had an answer. Victor Hale. I heard myself say the name, as though it had been pulled loose from somewhere deep inside my chest where I had been holding it down for nearly a day. Logan did not move, only tilted his head slightly as though to confirm he had heard correctly. "Who is he to you?" "A sponsor of the exhibition," I replied, my voice dry, my eyes fixed on the empty space above me on the ceiling. "A man everyone in the Chicago art world knows. A man people respect because of money and power." Logan nodded slightly, his hand resting on the side of the bed, his fingers tapping gently as though calculating something. "What did he do to you?" I closed my eyes, old images rising in my mind like slow-motion film reels. Every gesture, every breath, every tightening grip. I did not lie, but I did not tell everything. "He followed me into the back hallway," I said, each word dragging itself out of my throat. "He touched me." I pushed him away. Then he used the sculpture and struck me. I heard Logan exhale, slowly, not a sigh of relief, but the kind of exhale that comes when anger has passed the point of containment. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he took out his phone, opened his contacts, and dialed. I jerked upright, too fast, sending a sharp shock of pain through my skull. "What are you doing?" Logan did not look at me. "Calling my people. He does not deserve to breathe peacefully for another second." "No," I said, my voice higher than I intended. "Logan, stop. You do not understand. He has influence. A lot of it. At Magnolia, with funding boards, with arts councils, with the press. If you go after him like that, I will be the first one burned." Logan lifted his head and looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "You did nothing wrong, Emily." "Yes," I laughed weakly, the sound catching in my throat. "But women who tell the truth in my field are usually the first ones to lose their jobs." Logan was silent, then put the phone away, a gesture that felt like a concession. But his eyes still burned with a low, controlled flame. "Then tell me what you want," he said. Silence? Forgetting this? Letting him keep attending galas and funding art like some savior of culture? I gripped the edge of the blanket, my voice lowering. "I want to survive this. I want to keep my job. I want everything I have built over 7 years not to be destroyed just because I dared to say that a powerful man did something vile." Logan nodded, neither arguing nor trying to persuade me. But I could feel the machinery inside him turning. He was not the kind of man who walked away. "Then a compromise," he said slowly. "I will not touch him, not yet, but I will find out. I need to know who he is, where he goes, who he meets, who protects him. If you cannot stand in the open, then I will be the shadow behind you." I looked at him, feeling something inside me shift not because I trusted him completely, but because, for the first time since waking up, I felt someone was standing on my side without needing me to prove anything or plead for it. "All right," I whispered. "Just do not do anything that sends this out of control." Logan leaned in slightly, his eyes locking onto mine, steady and unflinching. "I do not lose control, Emily. I only remind men who believe they can crush others that there are people who will not stand still and watch." The next morning, I woke to the faint light of a Chicago dawn. My head still ached with a dull pulse, but more present than the pain was the thick tightening in my throat, as though every swallow was an effort to push back the truth screaming inside my mind. Logan had not returned last night as he said he might, but I knew he had not truly left. Somehow, I sensed he was still watching, from a distance, quietly, like a shadow that could think. When the door opened a little after 9, I expected Sophie. But it was not her. A woman I had never seen entered. She wore simple but neat civilian clothes, her dark hair tied low, a small name badge gleaming on her chest with the words Detective Nina Lopez. Her eyes were quick and sharp, but not cold. They carried something I was not ready to face understanding. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said, pulling up a chair and sitting beside the bed without asking whether I was ready or willing. "I am here because of an anonymous call received by the department early this morning. The caller left your name, the location, and enough detail that we could not ignore it. I need to speak with you for a moment." My heart tightened instantly. Logan. He had not kept his promise, or rather, he had kept it, just not in the way I expected. I pushed myself upright, leaning back against the pillows, my eyes fixed on the woman beside me. "I do not know who called, but I did not request police involvement." Lopez nodded, unsurprised. "I understand, but I also need you to understand this, Emily. You have the right to remain silent, but if you choose to speak, what you share could be the missing piece of a much larger picture than you realize." I clutched the blanket. "I do not have anything to share. I fell." The words dropped into the air like a bead of water falling onto cold stone. Lopez tilted her head, eyes steady on mine. I have heard that sentence many times. In 15 years as an investigator, I can tell you very few people truly fall and fracture their skull. She paused, then opened her bag and drew out a thin file. "Do you know Victor Hale?" My body stiffened. I could not hide it. Lopez saw. She did not smile, did not gloat. Her voice softened, nearly gentle. "In the past 5 years, 3 other women have filed complaints against Victor Hale for sexual or physical assault. All of them worked in the art world or in funding organizations. All of them withdrew their complaints afterward. None agreed to testify. There was no clear evidence, and no one would stand up." She opened the first page of the file, showing me a printed summary of names, dates, statements. I could not read clearly because my vision blurred, but I saw the red stamp over the line reading "Case closed." "I do not blame them," Lopez murmured. "I have sat with them in rooms like this. I have listened to them talk about how they feared losing their jobs, being blacklisted, being called liars. But I also know if one person stood up, others might follow." I swallowed, my throat burning. "I am not that person," I whispered. "I am not strong enough. I do not want to lose everything." Lopez nodded, not pushing. "You do not have to decide right now, but I will leave my card. If you change your mind, call me. And if you want to protect yourself, I need to know. Because if Victor truly did this, then you are in danger." She stood, placing an ivory-colored business card on the table beside the bed. "Be careful with men who believe they cannot be touched," she said before walking out. The door closed behind her without a sound. I stared at the card as though it were a double-edged blade. Behind me, my phone buzzed again. A new message. An unsaved number. I said it already. "Emily, do not be foolish. Sometimes silence is the wisest way to keep everything." I turned off the screen, my hand still trembling. But for the first time, I did not delete the message. I left it there, as a reminder, as evidence, and perhaps as a beginning. I sat in silence in the hospital room for more than an hour after Detective Lopez left, my eyes still fixed on the ivory-colored business card resting on the table as though it might somehow offer me an answer. I had read the name over and over, Nina Lopez, Chicago Police Department, enough times to memorize the shape of every letter. The last message from Victor still sat in the thread, neither deleted nor answered. I knew exactly what he meant. If I stayed silent, everything would be kept intact. But if I opened my mouth, he would not hesitate to burn down the path I had spent nearly a decade building. And then, I thought of the 3 other names Lopez had shown me. 3 women, 3 stories buried under fear. I thought of their faces, faint and blurred in those written statements, and I knew I could easily be the 4th, or, if I stayed silent, someone who allowed the list to grow longer. I closed my eyes and wondered if I ever had a daughter, would I teach her that silence was the only way to survive in an unjust world? If not, then what right did I have to stay silent now? When Sophie returned that afternoon, carrying a bag of food and an old magazine, I already knew what I had to say. "Sophie," I whispered, my voice still rough with medication. "I am going to report him." She froze for a moment, her eyes widening, then set everything down and pulled her chair close to the bed. "Are you sure?" I nodded, trying to steady myself though my throat was tight. Not because I want attention, or because I believe the legal system will do the right thing. I am doing it because I cannot bear the thought of him walking freely as though nothing happened while I lie here with a fractured skull and fear pressed into every breath I take. Sophie took my hand and squeezed. Then I will stand with you. You do not have to do this alone. I looked at her, tears filling my eyes. I am scared. So am I, Sophie whispered. But fear does not mean we are wrong. It only means we are about to do something that matters. That afternoon, Sophie called the law office where she worked as an associate. They were not criminal specialists, but she knew how to coordinate, who to contact, who could protect me from the media firestorm that was surely coming. She secured a consultation with an attorney named Karen Westbrook, a middle-aged woman with a firm voice and eyes cold as steel. Karen came to the hospital that same evening, carrying a thick file filled with legal procedures, victim rights, and what I needed to prepare myself to face. When she asked if I was certain I wanted to pursue legal action, I did not hesitate anymore. I will, I said, for the first time, without shaking at the mention of it. But I do not want it to be only my word against his. I need any evidence that could help. Karen nodded and opened her notebook. On the night of the incident, do you remember where the security cameras were placed? I frowned, thinking, then nodded slowly. There is a hallway camera where Victor attacked me. I am not sure if it was working, but I have seen it before. Karen immediately made a note. Good. We will file a request to obtain the full surveillance footage from that night. If there is anything on that tape, it will be the key. Sophie sat beside me throughout the entire meeting, her hand still holding mine as though if she let go, I would break into pieces. When Karen left, leaving behind the paperwork to sign and a scheduled date to file the claim officially, I felt as though I had stepped through a door that could never be opened backward again. Logan arrived later, after everyone else was gone. He did not speak when he entered, only pulled up a chair and sat beside me, his eyes asking what I had done. I already told you, I said, before he could ask. I reported him. Logan nodded, not surprised. I knew you would. You are not someone who can stay silent forever. I am scared, I admitted, for the second time that day. Logan took my hand, his gaze softening. Then be scared, but do not back down. Not this time. I leaned my head against his shoulder, allowing myself for the first time in days to loosen the knot inside me just a little. I knew the road ahead would be filled with things I could not predict, but at least I no longer had to walk it alone, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt as though I might win. Not just for justice, but for myself. The days that followed drifted by like a dense fog, thick between meetings with attorneys, sessions with the police, and long nights without sleep. The pain in my head slowly eased. The bruise on my cheek faded to a pale yellow, but my mind still could not find a place where it could breathe without trembling. The only thing keeping me from collapsing was Logan's presence. He did not speak much, did not push, did not ask unnecessary questions, but he came every day, always at the exact moment when I felt I could not hold myself together anymore. Some days he brought buttered toast from a small shop in River North because he knew I could not stomach hospital food. Other days he brought a book of classical art photography and read beside me in silence, his voice steady like a second heartbeat in the cold white room. I grew accustomed to waking each morning to find a cup of coffee waiting on the table, with a handwritten note in slightly leaning script. Drink while it is warm, or I will make another. I cannot remember exactly when my eyes began following Logan more than necessary, or when I noticed the quiet relief I felt each time I heard his familiar footsteps in the hallway. But one afternoon when a light Chicago rain brushed the windows and he sat beside me gently drying my hair with a towel, I knew I had stepped across a threshold from which there was no return. You do not have to do all of this, I said, trying to keep my voice soft. I know I am not easy to be around right now. Logan did not look up, his hand moving slowly through tangled strands. I am not here because it is easy. I am here because you do not have to pretend to be all right with me. His words tightened something deep inside my chest. For so many years, I had grown used to holding myself rigid, to proving I belonged, to earning the right to be heard, to be recognized. But with Logan, I did not need to do anything. I only needed to exist, and that was enough. On another night, when I was finally able to leave the bed and walk the hospital hallway, Logan guided me step by step, slowly, as though each movement was a quiet promise. We reached a wide glass window overlooking the park outside, where the autumn trees were shedding their leaves. The wind drifted through, carrying mist and the scent of damp earth. I stood there, leaning against the frame, watching the traffic below, and asked in a voice that felt like a whisper to myself, "Do you believe in second chances?" Logan looked at me for a long time, as though searching something deep inside me that I had not yet dared to face. "No," he said. "I believe in standing up after the first time you are knocked down. Because sometimes there is no second chance. There is only the choice to keep going or not." I turned toward him, the light from outside blurring his outline slightly, but I could still see the way he looked at me, as though I was not someone shattered, but someone slowly piecing herself back together. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough, "for being here." Logan reached out and took my hand, his palm warm and steady. "I am not going anywhere," he answered. In that moment, I no longer heard the medical machines, no longer felt the dull ache in my skull. There was only one thing, clear as the rhythm of my heartbeat, that no matter how long or fierce the battle ahead would be, I would no longer have to face it alone. And that, for me in that moment, was the closest thing to safety I had ever known. I had assumed the only thing I needed to worry about now was the approaching hearing, the legal documents waiting for my signature, the tense preparation sessions with Attorney Karen, and the invisible pressure of knowing that the entire city might see my name on the front page at any moment. But I was wrong, because emotions were a battlefield of their own, especially when Logan began to feel like a part of every day I lived through. He made no promises, offered no declarations, yet his presence was the most constant thing in the storm I was trying to survive. Until Sophie decided to have a serious conversation with me, and in that moment, everything shifted just slightly out of place. She arrived at the hospital on Saturday afternoon, carrying the crisp almond pastries I loved from an old shop in Hyde Park. At first, everything was simple: coffee, small talk, questions about my recovery and the therapy I would need once I was discharged. But then she set her cup down and looked at me with the expression I had known since childhood, the look of someone about to say something they did not want to say, but had no choice but to speak aloud. "Emily, I know Logan has been here for you, and I can see clearly that you are beginning to trust him, but I need you to be careful." I froze, the spoon suspended in midair. "Careful of what?" Sophie sighed, leaning back, fingers laced together in her lap. "I am not saying he is dangerous, but there are things you need to know before you give him all your trust. Logan Moreau is not just Claire's brother, not just a discreet investor. 3 years ago, he was involved in a financial dispute related to a collapsed real estate company in which he had a hidden investment stake. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, but the press was full of his name for a while. I know, because I was one of the people organizing the legal files for one of the involved parties." I swallowed slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "And what does that have to do with now?" "It shows he is someone who knows how to manipulate the system, someone who knows how to hide things, how to make sure no one can trace anything back to him. Think about it, all of this that happened to you, and he arrived at the perfect moment. Have you ever wondered why Claire called Logan instead of calling their mother? Why the first person to show up for you was not a close friend, not a lawyer, but a man once accused of bending the law and who disappeared from the financial world for an entire year?" I stared at her, my throat tightening. "He helped me, Sophie. He has never given me a reason to doubt him. And I hope that remains true," she said quickly. "But you are in a vulnerable place. You just survived a trauma. You are afraid, and you are searching for something to hold on to. And sometimes, people reach for the first hand extended toward them. Not because that person is right, but because there is no other choice." I turned away, my eyes drifting to the window, where the afternoon light spread across the distant red brick rooftops. I did not want to doubt Logan. I did not want to question the only person who stood beside me while everyone else was busy worrying in their own ways. But somewhere inside, the question Sophie planted had begun to take root. I remembered the way Logan avoided my eyes when I asked about his old business, the reason he withdrew from the investment world. I remembered the time he took a phone call in the hallway, speaking in French with tension in his voice, then returned with a faint smile as if nothing had happened. I did not know what that meant. But now, I could not stop wondering if Logan was hiding something, and if he was, whether I had the strength to face another betrayal. 3 days after Sophie's warning, I noticed Logan begin to change. Not in any dramatic way, not by avoiding me or dodging questions, but in the tiny details only someone truly paying attention would see. He glanced over his shoulder when leaving the hospital room, his phone always in his hand, sometimes silenced but never out of sight. One late afternoon, while I was reviewing documents with Karen, Logan arrived almost an hour later than planned. His shirt collar was creased, his hair slightly unruly, and his eyes no longer steady. Karen left soon after, and the room felt unnervingly still. "What happened?" I asked, my voice soft but clear. Logan sat down, his hands clasped tightly together, the silence so heavy I could hear the heartbeat monitor behind me. "This morning, my office was broken into," he said, after a long stretch of quiet. "The glass was shattered, the computers smashed, nothing was stolen, just destruction, intentional." I sat upright, my pulse racing. "Did you call the police?" Logan nodded slightly. "They came, wrote the report, but I know nothing will come of it. Whoever did it was not a junkie breaking in. This was a warning. From who? I knew the answer, but I needed to hear it from him. From the people you are about to confront. From the system protecting Victor." My throat felt scorched. Sophie's worry, her warnings about Logan's past, they no longer sounded like distant hypotheticals. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Do you have any proof?" Logan reached into his coat and handed me a thin envelope. Inside was a printed photograph, the edges slightly curled from moisture. It was an image of me standing by the hospital window, the light falling across my face. The photo had been taken from far away, likely from a building across the street. "This was delivered to the office this morning," he said. "No sender, just a handwritten message on the back. If you want her to stay safe, disappear." I gripped the photo, my hand trembling. "Why send it to you and not to me?" Logan looked at me steadily, his voice low. "Because they know you fear losing your career, and I have nothing to lose except you." For a moment, I could not breathe. I did not know whether his words were a declaration or a sentence. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Logan stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside, looking out as though weighing something heavy. "I will not step back, but I will not let you be pulled into this part." "What part?" I asked, frowning. He turned toward me, his eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. "The part without lawyers or courts. The part where if Victor thinks he can intimidate, I show him that I can play too, and not by his rules." I stepped out of bed, still dizzy, and took hold of his arm. "Do not do anything reckless. I have already begun the legal process. I do not want you to ruin it." "I am not doing it to ruin anything," he said quietly. "I am doing it to keep you intact until you can stand in a courtroom and speak the truth." That night, Logan did not stay at the hospital the way he usually did. I did not ask where he went. But past midnight, I received a message from an unknown number. A man who thinks he stands in the shadows often forgets there are those who have lived in the dark far longer than he has. I stared at the words for a long time, my grip tightening around the phone. There was no name, but I knew exactly who sent it. And what frightened me most was not the message itself, but the fact that I did not know whether it was meant as a warning for Victor or a warning for me. I did not see Logan again for 2 days after that. No messages, no calls, no morning cup of coffee waiting on the bedside table the way it always had before. Even though he had never promised anything, his absence made everything feel heavier and more hollow than ever. I tried to anchor myself to the things directly ahead, working with Karen on the witness list, reviewing my statement, forcing myself to eat enough to stay strong for the upcoming hearing. But I could not stop thinking about Logan, and especially about what he said before he left, that he would not let me be pulled into the part that had no lawyers or courts. The part belonging to the dark. I was afraid. Not only because he might be doing something dangerous, but because I was not sure I had the strength to withstand another disappearance. On the third night, rain fell. The gentle drizzle of early November tapped against the hospital window, making the room feel even more somber. I was rereading my final report when the door opened. Logan stood there, soaked, his hair clinging to his forehead, his eyes dark like the night after a storm. He carried nothing. No coat, no briefcase. Just himself, standing there as though the entire world outside had dissolved into the rain. I did not speak. I only looked at him for a long moment. "I am sorry," Logan said, his voice hoarse as though he had not spoken to anyone in hours. "I should not have disappeared like that." I set the folder down, holding my voice steady so it would not break. I imagined every possibility, that you were arrested, threatened, hurt, that you were doing something dangerous, or worse, that you chose to leave. Logan stepped into the room slowly, each step like he was walking across unsteady ground, made of something not yet forgiven. I did not leave, but it is true I confronted the man you are fighting, in a different way. I know you do not approve, but I could not sit still knowing he is out there, believing he can control everything with money and power. I did a few things, so he would understand that if he touched you again, it would not be only the law he is facing. I rose from the bed and moved toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. Are you hurt? Logan shook his head slightly. No, but I realized something, clearer than ever before. I looked into his eyes, waiting for the words I had felt coming for so long. I do not know where to begin, he said softly. I am not a perfect man, you know that. I have a past, I have made mistakes, I have dark parts I still cannot name. But from the first night I saw you lying there, blood staining the white cloth, your eyes still trying to hold on to the light, I knew I would never be able to walk away again. My voice caught. He continued, deeper now, but steady. You are the only light I have ever felt. I do not have to apologize for wanting. You do not need me to be saved. You are strong enough to save yourself. But if you allow it, I want to be here for everything that comes after. I lifted my hand and touched his cheek, warm and cool at once. The rain outside kept falling, but inside the room everything felt still. I used to fear that if I let someone in, I would lose everything again. I used to believe that if I leaned on you, I would be weaker, blinded. But now I understand. I do not have to brace myself to appear strong when someone truly wants to shelter me. Logan took my hand and held it gently, his eyes never leaving mine. I love you, Emily. I smiled, tears slipping down my face before I could stop them. And I love you. There was no cinematic kiss, no sweeping music rising in the air. Only two people who had walked through the deepest fractures of themselves, finally finding each other at a point where nothing needed to be explained. Logan pulled me into his arms and held me tightly. I pressed my face against his chest, hearing the strong, steady rhythm of his heart. For the first time in many weeks, I felt safe. Not because he promised to protect me, but because I knew he would not let go, even while the world outside was still in chaos. The Cook County Courthouse on the first morning of the hearing carried a dense, weighted atmosphere that only those who have walked the hallway leading to a courtroom can understand. The sound of shoes echoed in steady rhythms across the marble floor, threaded with the clacking of keyboards from clerks typing transcripts, and somewhere farther down, the heavy steel door closing like a final period at the end of lives that had not yet spoken their defense. I entered the courtroom in a simple dark dress, my hair pulled back, my face without makeup, as though the truth did not need polish. Logan sat in the back row, his eyes following every step I took, while Sophie sat beside me, holding my hand tightly as attorney Karen Westbrook straightened her stack of files and gave me a final look before everything began. Across the aisle, Victor Hale sat motionless, his perfectly tailored suit and utterly calm expression, suggesting that none of what was about to unfold concerned him at all. At his side was a team of attorneys whose names I recognized from financial reports and high-profile litigation cases, lawyers who were not only skilled, but who operated without limits in what they would do to protect a client. The presiding judge, a stern woman in her early 50s, opened the proceedings by summarizing the nature of the case: a victim with a severe cranial injury, suspected assault in a professional setting, and the factors related to an imbalance of power between the victim and the accused. Karen began with my testimony. I stood, my voice steadier than I expected. I told everything from the beginning: the exhibition, the back hallway, the dim lights, the hand gripping my arm, the thick stench of whiskey, the fear, the resistance, and finally the bronze sculpture striking my skull, turning a brilliant evening into a nightmare. I added nothing, embellished nothing. I told only what I remembered. Across the aisle, Victor's attorney rose to counter. She wore a navy suit and spoke with a chilling precision, pressing into the gaps of my recounting. No witnesses. The hallway camera footage was grainy, lacked audio, and could not clearly identify the defendant. No trace of blood found on the bronze sculpture because it had been cleaned. She emphasized that the power dynamic was speculative, that I had motive to fabricate a claim out of emotional disappointment or workplace conflict, that I waited too long before coming forward, and during that time, continued to attend arts events as though nothing had happened. Karen countered by presenting the medical report, internal correspondence from Magnolia Gallery showing signs of psychological distress after the incident, and most importantly, new evidence, a grainy video still showing two figures in the dark hallway, one of them with a build and movement pattern matching Victor Hale. Karen also called two witnesses to the stand, a catering employee who saw Victor walking into the back hallway at the corresponding time, and one of the three women who had previously filed and withdrawn complaints. Her name was Mira Leston, a former events manager at an art center in Philadelphia who had flown to Chicago to testify. Mira stood there, her voice still unsteady, recounting an experience nearly identical to mine, the arrogance in his tone, the hand sliding from her arm to her waist, and when she pushed back, the forceful shove that sent her head striking a metal table. She never spoke up then, because Victor was the primary sponsor on the project she was working on. But when she learned I had filed, she decided she would not be silent again. The courtroom fell into a suffocating quiet when Mira stepped down. Karen looked at me once more before closing her argument. Miss Emily Carter is not here to ask for pity. She is here because she understands that silence is not a way to survive, but a tool that allows power to continue its harm. She chose to break that silence, and the only thing we are asked to do today is listen to her with the fairness the law promises to uphold. I sat, my heart pounding wildly, refusing to glance in Victor's direction. But I saw it, the flicker of unease in his eyes, no longer the flawless confidence he wore when he entered the courtroom. I did not know what the ruling would be, but I knew I had done everything I could, and I was no longer afraid. Not anymore, not ever again. When the video was projected onto the large screen at the center of the courtroom, the space fell into a strange, sudden silence, as though the whole world held its breath for a moment that could never be reversed. The footage was grainy, the hallway camera old, without sound, only a flickering sequence of black and white images with unstable light. But even within that distortion, the movements of the two figures were chillingly clear. One was taller, approaching from the upper left corner of the frame, while the smaller figure in a black dress with a posture achingly familiar appeared from the service corridor door. I saw myself, 6 hours earlier, walking that hallway with quick, steady steps. Then Victor appeared, following me, and when I turned, he moved forward, blocking my path like a wall. The video had no sound, but I remembered every word I said, remembered the sharp burn of alcohol in his breath, and the slick emptiness in his eyes as his hand reached for my arm. The next images showed the struggle, my arm pulling away, my body stepping back, then a violent motion that nearly sent us both off balance. A frozen frame, then the moment where Victor grabbed something heavy from the pedestal behind him, clearly the bronze sculpture, and swung it toward me. The camera did not catch the exact point of contact, because I had already fallen out of frame at that instant, but anyone who watched the footage understood what happened next. One figure collapsed, and the other staggered upright, looked around, then hurried away down the opposite corridor. No one spoke when the video ended. No one needed to. I lowered my head, my hands gripping the fabric of my dress in my lap. Karen placed her hand gently on mine, like a final reassurance. Victor's attorney rose to counter, arguing that the footage had no audio, that the images were unclear, that interpretation was subjective. But when the judge requested to view the clip again, not a single person in the room looked away. Watching it the second time, I no longer felt fear. I felt sorrow. Not for myself, but for all the women who had lived with silence, who had wondered whether what happened to them counted, whether it was enough to be believed. And today, with everything laid bare before those who held authority, I understood that the truth, however blurred or fractured, still had its own power. The judge requested a brief recess before delivering her ruling, and when she returned, the room felt frozen. No one moved. No one dared breathe deeply. She flipped through the file before her, her eyes calm but unwavering. After reviewing the physical evidence, the testimony of the plaintiff, the statements of corroborating witnesses, as well as the security footage presented, the court finds sufficient reasonable basis to believe that an act of assault occurred as described in Miss Emily Carter's account, though the defendant has not been criminally charged at this time. In this civil hearing, the court declares the defendant, Victor Hale, civilly liable for causing severe physical and emotional harm to the plaintiff, and orders compensation for material and emotional damages as proposed by the plaintiff's counsel. I did not hear all the words she spoke. I only remembered the pounding of my heart as if it might burst, remembered Sophie wrapping her arms tightly around me from behind, and Karen giving me a small nod with a look that said, "We did it." Victor did not turn to look at me as he left the courtroom, but I watched him go, no longer afraid, no longer full of hatred. I only felt something inside me loosen, a knot that had tightened, for years finally coming undone. When we stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast a gentle gold across the courthouse steps. Logan was waiting, saying nothing, simply opening his arms. I fell into him, crying without sound. This time the tears were not of fear or pain, they were the tears of a truth finally heard, and of a woman who, at last, had found herself again. I believed that once the hearing ended and the ruling was handed down, everything would return to its place, that I could go back to the life I had before, as though that night had never happened, as though there had never been blood on the tile floor, as though there were no nightmares jerking me awake in the dark to the sound of my own heartbeat pounding like a warning. But I soon learned one truth. There is no such thing as going back. Some things, once broken, cannot heal into their old shape again, and the only thing left to do is rebuild, from the pieces that remain, with your own hands, in the aftermath of the storm. I left the hospital a week after the hearing concluded, my body still weak, but my mind clearer than it had ever been. Magnolia Contemporary sent a formal apology and invited me to return to the lead curator position they once promised. But I refused. Not because I no longer loved art, but because I knew I needed a new space, somewhere I would not have to see that hallway every day, somewhere I would not have to pretend to be fine, just to remain part of a world that once chose silence over my pain. I moved in with Sophie temporarily, into the small old-town apartment she kept after moving in with her fiancé. The first mornings felt strange. No machines, no clinical hallways, no tense meetings, only the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen and the soft classical music Sophie always played while reading the news. Logan came every evening after work, bringing nothing but patience. He listened as I read him pieces of writing I was working on, walked with me along the edge of Lake Michigan, and never once asked when I would be normal again, because he knew that no longer mattered. I began writing more than ever before. At first it was scattered notes, then short reflections, and eventually a long essay for an independent arts journal. The piece was titled, "Silence is Not a Choice," recounting the journey from a young curator to a survivor, from a woman standing behind the lights to a woman standing on a witness stand and speaking her truth aloud. The essay was published in a special issue on women's rights in the arts, and within 3 days, I received hundreds of emails from women everywhere, women who had been hurt, who had stayed silent, who felt no one believed them. They said I had spoken for them. I read each message with a trembling heart. Something deep within me began to move, not pain, but hope. A month later, I was invited to speak at a national conference on art and social justice. I stood on stage, my hands still slightly shaking, but my voice steadier than ever. I spoke about how an artistic space meant to honor beauty and truth had once been the place where I lost myself, and how art, in the end, helped me move beyond it by turning memory into action, pain into voice. After the talk, a nonprofit organization contacted me, asking me to join a new project building mentorship and protection programs for young women in creative fields. I agreed, without hesitation. It was the first time in months that I felt I was not merely surviving, but living with purpose. Logan remained beside me, not as a protector, but as a companion. We did not need to speak often about love. It was present in every look, every small gesture, the way he always checked that I carried pain medication when we went out, or the way I brewed the exact tea he preferred each night, though he never asked. Love, after all, did not need to be fierce. It only needed to be true enough to lean against when the world outside still carried too much uncertainty. One afternoon in December, when the first flakes of snow rested on the rooftops of Chicago, I sat by the window of our new apartment, a small place filled with light, where Logan and I had just moved. On the table lay a blank book open to the first page, and on the laptop screen was the draft of the book I had begun to write, a memoir, not only telling my story, but the story of many women forced into silence. I knew there was still work to do. The scar on my head still reminded me each morning that a part of me had once been deeply wounded, but I was no longer ashamed of it. I had learned to touch it without trembling. because I knew that from here on, I did not live in fear. I lived to tell, to guide, to remind others that even if you have once been broken, it does not mean you cannot begin again. And sometimes, beginning again is the highest form of courage. On a spring morning, when the sky over Chicago bloomed with sunlight after days of damp gray, I woke to the scent of coffee drifting through the air and soft music coming from the kitchen. Logan stood with his back to me, sleeves rolled on a white shirt, his left hand holding a cup while his right hand stirred a small pot on the stove. I sat up, the early light slanting through the large window and tinting the entire room in gold. Everything felt so peaceful that I wished I could hold the moment forever. After a simple breakfast, he invited me to walk along Lake Michigan. The March wind was still cold but no longer sharp, just enough for two people to drift closer together. We walked the familiar path, the same one where months earlier I had cried into his arms, still lined with bare trees, though now small buds had begun to appear. Logan was quiet for a long while, then stopped in the middle of the path where the lake stretched wide before us. He turned to me, his gaze deep and sincere as always, and asked if I remembered the first time we met in the hospital, saying that he did not know then what place he would have in my life, but now, if I would allow it, he wished to be the one who stayed forever. He reached into his coat and took out a small velvet box, opened it, and inside lay a ring simple and graceful, the stone not large but glowing with a gentle light like the man himself. Emily Carter, will you marry me? My heart beat so hard it ached, not from surprise, but because every emotion held since the first day I met Logan rose all at once into a nod I could not hold back. I embraced him, unable to speak, only nodding slowly and with certainty. Behind us, the water lapped softly against the shore as if in agreement. In that moment, I no longer remembered fear or darkness, only trust and a love sprouting from what once had been broken. Life never moves in a perfect straight line. There are falls, injustices, nights that seem without dawn. Yet from those fractures we learn to love more deeply, to be braver, and to be more grateful for every moment we are still here, still heard, still choosing. My story is not a miracle. It is a journey of choices, choosing to rise instead of collapse, choosing to speak instead of remain silent, and choosing love even after the heart has been wounded. Thank you for staying with me until the very last steps of this journey. If Emily's story touched any place within your heart, please subscribe to the channel, press like, and share this video with someone you believe may need a spark of hope, a little courage, or simply a story to reflect upon. Tell us where you are watching from, and what today's story makes you think about in your own life. Leave a comment below and share your feelings so we can listen to your true voice from deep within your heart. Remember that every word you share may be the strength someone needs in the midst of a difficult day. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos, where we continue seeking stories that are honest, human, and full of emotion. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, joy, and serenity every day. Farewell. Until we meet again.